Hey everyone, Nick from ResoNix here. I want to make a quick video today that goes over something that I think, or actually something that I know is very important when it comes to getting the best end result out of your sound system possible. And that is sound system design. Sound system design is the planning and layout of the system, everything from equipment selection to installation types, speaker locations, stuff like that. The plan, the layout, the blueprints for what your system is. And I know a lot of people like to, mix and match various things or read various ideas on the internet or see recommendations from other people and, give it all a shot. But, what I'm finding is system design is not very well thought out or understood by many hobbyists. And it turns out that it's usually one of their biggest holdbacks in having the best possible sounding car audio system for the amount of money that they spent on it. And this situation here is a perfect example. I was discussing it on one of the Facebook groups or Reddit groups. And essentially this was a sound system where the customer came to me, he purchased a couple things from me, but it was just a DSP amplifier and a 2-channel amplifier. He already had everything else picked out, and I helped him go over, okay, like these are the options for a good DSP amplifier and, all the other things from there. But what had happened when he installed it all, he, got it all installed and took it to me, and we did some tuning. And that tuning can be seen here in this set of measurements. This was the first time I tuned it. And this is the last time I tuned it. And I want to show you the differences in changes. After the first time we tuned it, he had a basic set of 3-way Morel components that featured one of their dome mid-ranges and one of their standard 6.5-inch mid-bass drivers. And most importantly, that we're going to focus on in this video is, a set of Rockford subwoofers, which are fine, nothing crazy. They can definitely handle power and get loud. Sound quality, not their strongest point, but more importantly, in this case, the amplifier that was powering them was an AudioControl mono amplifier, which had a built-in subsonic filter. Now, what had happened was, we can see here, this was the subwoofer measurement before any equalization, anything. This was no crossover on the low end except for the subsonic filter that was built into the amplifier that he was using, and an 80 hertz crossover, maybe even 100 hertz crossover on the top end. And the combination of, the subwoofer being like your general public style subwoofer, and they're probably going for a little bit more output than sound quality, combined with this amplifier that cuts off all the low end, we ended up with a, frequency response that is just this triangle, essentially. It looks like a Dorito or a mountain. There is no low end extension at all. The subwoofers are definitely capable of playing very low, but I also don't think they were designed super well for the enclosure he was using. It's a relatively small sealed enclosure. And what had happened was, we had a pretty decent setup. I think the Morel dome mid-ranges were also really holding him back because the dome mid-ranges just cannot play low. So we had to cross them at like 500 or 600 hertz. This was their frequency response in the dash corner with I think it was the 500 hertz crossover applied. And I think it was a 4,000 hertz crossover on the top end, all being 24 dB Linkwitz Riley. So these two things were really holding the system back, along with a couple of other small stuff. He had the tweeters in the factory, I think or maybe he had them in the pillars, but I think they were in the pillars. But with the way that car was set up, like the gauge cluster hump was in the way, and it had this handle. And it just didn't really offer the best end result. So I obviously tuned the car, and I gave him a few recommendations. One being, get rid of that AudioControl amplifier so you can actually have subwoofers that play low. Two, change out the mid-ranges to something that can also play low. Otherwise, you're not really getting as much benefit out of the three-way system. Excuse me. And then put the tweeters into the sail panel. I usually don't recommend sail panel tweeters, but in this specific vehicle, it was probably the best option. I've actually done this car before, and I've heard many other versions of this car, which was, a current gen Ram 1500 truck. But yeah, anyway, so let's focus on the subwoofer for now. This is the subwoofer, no EQ, and this is what we ended up with. I really had to boost some of the low end with a low shell filter, had to do some boosting in the top end just to get it to play high, and it just hardly even struggled to play flat down to 20 hertz. But I'll tell you this response actually looks pretty decent for what it is. Yeah, cool, we could wish it plays lower, but let's be real, like, not much music content plays lower than 20, but it still sounded off. I don't know why. Something about it just sounded off. And I'm going to touch on more of this later when we get into the later tunes. But yeah, that was a big problem. It was a big weak point. You had a really nice system. You spent a lot of money on, a Helix P6 Ultimate, a Helix P2 to power the mid-bass drivers. And the system was being limited because we were boosting so much on the low end that, like, the sub amp was sort of tapping out. And it just wasn't working. The low end just wasn't working. It wasn't very clean. It wasn't giving us much output before it really gave up. It just didn't work. And then again, the mid ranges, dome mid ranges could be great in a studio setting, but personally, I really don't believe they belong in a car audio setting. Besides very specific applications where you need a very shallow mounting depth or something like that, or a very small mid-range, outer diameter-wise and depth-wise. But in normal situations, a dome mid-range just limits you so much, having to cross them over so high. Why go with a mid-range where you have to cross it at 5 or 6 or 700 hertz when you could get another 3-inch mid-range that could cross at 200 or 250 hertz, like, any normal 3-inch mid-range. It just doesn't really make any sense. There's pros and cons to everything, but here there's not many pros to going with a dome mid-range in a car application, at least a normal car application. So those were my recommendations to him. So what he had done from there was he's like, okay. And another recommendation, since the mid-bass drivers also have cancellation, the driver's side mid-bass has early roll-off on the low end and all this crazy cancellation here. I also recommended, you have a really good system. Another thing you can do is a front subwoofer, So he's like, okay, well, let's do it. I was like, oh, you actually, okay, cool. Like, I was making those recommendations just to, if you wanted to do something in the future, this was something that he had done all by himself, but he actually wanted me to do it. And I told him, I was like, hey, like, I actually don't install anymore, but I do work hand in hand with a local shop where I do the design of the system. They do the labor. Very good, skilled shop, Sound Concept in Nanuet, New York. I work with them very closely. So I do the system design. We go over it together, me and the customer, and then me and the customer bring it essentially to Sound Concept, and we say, hey, this is what our game plan is, and then, let's do it. And then when it's all ready, I go in and tune it. So while he was like, okay, like, I'm going to do the front sub, and I'm also going to change the mid-range and move the tweeter like you recommended. So we ended up swapping the mid-range, the tweeter also, since we were changing it anyway, changing locations anyway. He wanted to just do one and done and make it something really good. And same with the mid-bass drivers. He's like, you know what, we're in there, like, let's do this right. The car offered a 6x9 location, but he had a 6.5-inch mid-bass, so he was, leaving something on the table. So we ended up going with the Karma Mobile Audio 6x9s in the factory door location. We did a little bit of extra sound deadening. We ended up with Focal Utopia 3-inch, the WM mid-range drivers. And then we did the Focal Utopia TBM tweeter in the cell panels. Matt Kim, one of my former employees, helped me 3D scan and 3D print one of the RAM, cell panels that I've done previously on another customer's car. And, we utilized that. And along the way, again, we did the front sub, which we actually tried the new Truly shallow subwoofers, which actually worked out really well. We did a 10-inch Truly subwoofer in a 0.3 cubic foot sealed enclosure in the passenger footwell. And things were good. But what we didn't do was change the AudioControl mono amplifier or the rear subwoofers. I don't know why, this was sort of something that I made the suggestion, but between the customer and, what he just decided to leave that part and he was going to do it later, which, okay, I get it. You just spent all this money in a system just to have it tuned and then to pretty much rip out most of it and have a shop install some new stuff. I totally get it. But that brings us to right here, the next tune. Or was this? This was, let me see, which one is this? Yeah, okay. This was the next tune. So I want to clear this. Or actually this was with grill. Yeah, no, those were, yeah, this was the first one. Okay. So this is the batch of tuning where we had all the new speakers, an added front sub, but we still had that same AudioControl amplifier with the same Rockford P3 subwoofers. And, this is the rear sub. Here's the front sub. We do get a lot of cabin gain in that area in pretty much every car around here. But you can see it actually extends really low for what it is. It doesn't have a ton of output capability down this low because, it's so shallow and, it doesn't have a ton of excursion and not a ton of cone area, but it's still playing low. It's playing lower than the rear subs. So I was like, oh boy, I showed up to tune and I didn't even realize that we did all this work, but the customer didn't plan on swapping the rear subs. I was like, oh boy, all right. Well, last time we got it down to 20 hertz, let me see if I could just keep that on the rear sub, integrate the front sub, and then, tune the front stage and see what we could get. In the long run, this is what I was able to get out of the rear sub. Got a little lower, but we're cutting all of this output that it has just to give it low-end extension because of that amplifier's built-in subsonic filter. And this is what I had with the front sub after the crossover. And then this next one was the next batch of measurements from the same day. And this is what I ended up with, this looks good, but what we heard, by the way, these measurements, when I am done with measurements here, this is not the end result. After I get here, this is just my target. And then I go in and start making plenty of adjustments by ear, whether it's, level stuff or timing stuff or EQ stuff. This is just all of my measurements and then it goes by ear. And when it was all said and done, the biggest problem was the disconnect between that front sub and the rear sub were really obvious. And I don't know what it was. AccuBase on that AudioControl amplifier was turned off. So it wasn't that. But it was behaving very weird. It was giving us a lot of rumble, but it just didn't sound good. I don't know if it was exactly the subwoofers. I've tuned systems with those subs before and didn't have this problem with them. They were always okay subwoofers. They weren't great, but they were okay. And again, it just sounded totally disconnected no matter what I did to blend it in with that front subwoofer. So I'm like, oh my God, this customer just, he bought all this stuff himself, installed it all himself, then took it out, had a shop install all new stuff. And it's like, you know, the front sounded really good, but it was being completely neutered in sound quality and in output by this rear subwoofer situation. So I called the customer. I was like, hey, look, you know, we did all of the right things that I suggested except for one thing. And he's like, yeah, the subwoofer, I'm going to save that for later. I was like, all right, look, though, you just drove 2 or 3 hours, you know, to drop this car off. You just spent a really good chunk of change. And I'm going to be honest, like we're having to limit the output of the front subwoofer, of the front mid-bass, the front mid-range, and the front tweeter, all just to match what this subwoofer situation is giving us. And I was like, you know, this would be like having a prize-winning horse and then, you know, neutering it. It just, it doesn't make any sense. So I was like, look, it's here. We're right here. Let's just finish this once. Let's get it over with. And he's like, all right, what do you suggest? And I said, the first thing I'm suggesting, let's get rid of that AudioControl amplifier. By the way, I don't mean to hate on AudioControl. I'm sure they're great people. I know Amp or Stinger purchased the company as a whole recently, and they're all good people there. But my God, these amplifiers and their processors are absolutely freaking garbage. Anyways, I was like, let's get rid of that AudioControl amplifier, throw that thing in the freaking trash, and put in any normal mono amplifier that doesn't have a built-in subsonic filter. Let's get these subwoofers playing low. Like, you have a really good system. Let's get everything we can out of it. And he's like, okay. And he's like, what else? He's like, do you suggest changing this up? Do you suggest changing the subs as well? I was like, well, I do. They definitely do not match the quality of the front subwoofer or any of the front speakers. Like, you know, cheap Rockford sub compared to Focal Utopia's a truly front sub in Karma 6x9-inch mid-bass. It's just like, it doesn't make any sense. So I was like, you know, let's go with some, you know, Audio Mobile Elite subwoofers, and they'll actually play very nicely in this tiny enclosure that you have. We won't have to modify it, and it's the correct size. It was about a 1.5 cubic foot enclosure. We did 2 10s. It fit right in. And it's like, okay, you know, let's do it. Let's delay the pickup a few days. Let's get that all swapped in. And I want to show you what we ended up with instead. So I also wanted to re-EQ the mid-ranges. This is the Focal Utopias before I did EQ measurements. And here was the new subwoofer before EQ. Flat down to about 5 hertz, which I think is as low as my measurement, my mic interface measures to. Yeah, we have this cabin gain peak here, but like, we are flat down as low as any system can reasonably go. And this is from 2 10-inch subwoofers in a 1.5, actually it turned out to be, like, after displacement and everything, turned out to be like 1.3 cubic feet. 2 10s in a 1.3 cubic foot enclosure. You do not need 18s with a giant hole cut in your floor to get low end extension, people. Again, this is where proper system design comes in, where you do not need all this crazy stuff and to make all these modifications to do this. And on the flip side, like, you could make some decisions that also keep it simple, but do end up with these really poor results beforehand. And this is why you see people talking about doing all this crazy stuff, but you just have to really understand how these speakers work, how these enclosures work, how the system works as a whole, how the car's cabin gain comes into play here. I actually have a really good article on the website. If you go to the blog section, how to use WinISD to model, simulate, and compare loudspeakers. And you can use this to figure out, oh, actually, it looks like I need to change up the text on this. How you can figure out, oh, I don't really want to go crazy, but like, I want a, you know, solution that works in an easy application just like this. And here you go. So now we had not only just as much output, but we had more output because the subwoofers were actually also a little bit more sensitive. They were able to play lower. They were still able to handle this super small enclosure. And now we were able to play everything as we really needed. Again, this is, before I did any EQ stuff by ear, but now we were able to gain, I know it doesn't really show up on the RTA, but I was cutting about 7-ish dB out of the front sub, front mid bass, front mid range, and front tweeters to match this bullshit that this front subwoofer was doing when we had this this new system, but still retained the previous rear subwoofer. So everything was being neutered in output, and it being just not a high quality subwoofer just stuck out like a sore thumb, and not a high quality amplifier just stuck out like a sore thumb. And sure enough, proper system design, if he just came to me from the start and said, Nick, I want to do a whole system, what should I do? And I could have told him exactly what we could have been doing and achieving this result right out of the gate, and spending way less money, way less time, and being able to enjoy it sooner and for longer. But, it just, shit happens. And hobbyists don't have the education to know how this is all going to work out. And actually, this is also why I started offering the sound system design consultation service through ResoNix. Actually, the customer that I'm even speaking about wrote a review on this for me. This is exactly what had happened. And yeah, with this, we can go over a system design before you start spending money on stuff, not knowing what's really going to happen. And also, the price you pay here can go towards a purchase of the equipment that we're going to go over if it's something that we offer. So anyways, back to what it was. Customer is picking up this car tomorrow morning. He hasn't even got to hear it yet. But from me personally, like, the system from when it started here was a good system. I'm not gonna sit here and say it was a bad system, but listening to it, I could say, yeah, for the amount of money and the amount of effort you spent, it should be better. Then he took most of my recommendations, ended up, with this tune, and it was still a really good sounding system. But again, that rear sub and rear sub amplifier were dirtying everything else up and limiting output. And then making that one final adjustment ended up with a really good end result. And yeah, he's going to pick it up tomorrow. And, going from this to this was a massive step up. And then even just from this to this, just changing that rear subwoofer and that rear sub amplifier was a game changer. It allowed, much higher quality subs. They were able to blend in much better and just sound clean. They don't sound like subwoofers anymore. It sounds like it's part of the music. And, we got a lot more output. We got a lot more low end extension, which is great. Who doesn't love low end extension? And yeah, again, it's just one of many cases. I get phone calls for this every single day where somebody calls me and says, hey, Nick, I have this system, but I'm not really too happy with it. I'm thinking about changing. I'm thinking about changing this AudioControl DSP amplifier and getting one of the Helixes. Let me guess, you watched the one guy on YouTube who recommended it. Of course, how'd you know? Because I do this phone call every single day. And yeah, I run into, hobbyists who just do not have proper guidance. They just have quote unquote guidance from people that are trying to advertise stuff because they're, advertising partners on YouTube, and it ends up with just really shitty system design, or they're buying pre-made kits from people that just frankly aren't good at car audio. They might be good at fabricating or good at installing, but they're not good at executing a car audio system, meaning the system design, the intricate system installation details, and especially the tuning. They're just slapping in, you know, brands and products that, you know, they make money off of and they have a good relationship with, and they're quote unquote tuning it, and it's just not working out. So yeah, again, for anyone watching this, you know, just a quick little thing about properly selecting your equipment beforehand. And if you don't know what you're doing, I'm right here. You know, I know this might seem like a high price tag, but again, this will go towards equipment that you purchase from me if we decide on equipment that you can purchase from me. Not only that, but frankly, I'm gonna say this $250 is not even, it's like a fraction of the amount of money that this customer right here spent doing the revisions on the system. Not even including the initial investment, just the revision. This is like a little itty bitty tiny fraction to where, like, if I added this to the price, you wouldn't even know that the difference was there. Like, so again, do it once, do it right. If you don't know exactly what's going on and you're seeing all these, you know, forum discussions or Facebook group discussions, and so many people are recommending all of these different things, and you're not sure who to believe or what to believe, I'm just going to be frank right here. Honestly, there's no one better than me when it comes to system design that you're going to be able to consult with. I fucking guarantee it. Every single one of my customers that I help with is ecstatic with the end results. And I'm going to be able to help you every step along the way, get it tuned properly, and you are going to be stoked. Not only that, again, we also offer remote DSP tuning services for very select customers who purchase the same equipment from me. So yeah, you know, again, I have a ton of happy customers with these services. Not that you even have to go through it. If you are wanting to design your own system, you don't have to consult with us. I'm just throwing it out there. Like, you know, it's almost like I'm criticizing this person's decisions without even offering a solution. But frankly, you know, this is the solution I have for you. You know, I can't teach you everything. There's just not enough time in the world. But if you do want my help, you know, there are options for it. So yeah, thanks for watching. If you have any questions about what we discussed in this video or anything else, or any other things that you might want me to go over that I might be able to help with, feel free to let me know. And yeah, thank you for watching. Enjoy.